20th, 1999. Three Japanese banks announced a merger this morning that will create the world's largest ever banking group. And the U.S. pitches in as efforts continue to rescue as many as 35,000 people still trapped in rubble following Turkey's devastating earthquake.
First Business, America's business news and information leader. Now, here's Nathan Roberts.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Roberts in Washington. Barton Eckert has the day off. It will be the largest banking group in the world. Three Japanese banks announced a plan this morning for a broad alliance that will create a bank with assets of more than $1 trillion. The banks are Dai-ichi Kangyo Bank Limited, the Industrial Bank of Japan Limited, and Fuji Bank Limited. And the merger is so big it's going to take the next 2 years to implement it. The $1.2 trillion in assets represented by the three banks far exceeds the current leader, Germany's Deutsche Bank, which has assets of just over $735 billion. News of the huge banking alliance, as you might expect, sent the Nikkei index soaring above the 18,000 level, with investors hoping it will lead to more mergers in Japan's beleaguered banking industry. The Nikkei gained 218 points to close at 18,098. The dollar was trading up against the yen. Hong Kong followed on Tokyo's coattails. South Korean stocks ended higher as foreign investors consolidated their holdings. Taiwan also higher on foreign buying. Thai stocks making big strides this morning. Malaysia and Indonesia treading water, and a quiet session in Australia. Checking the markets in the UK this morning, the FTSE 100 opens following a loss of almost 84 points on Thursday. The yen, pound, and Swiss franc are all higher this morning. The euro down fractionally. Brent North Sea crude is up 33 cents to $20.90 the barrel. Investors in Mexico ignored the good news of higher crude oil export prices and a strong gross domestic product report and chose instead to focus on the expectations for higher interest rates in the United States. The Bolsa index slumped 19, while the peso ended the day a bit stronger at 9.33. On Wall Street, word of a wider than expected trade deficit took its toll on the dollar and rattled investors. The Dow went into an early tailspin before recovering and closing down just 27.5 points. The Nasdaq, hit hard by losses in the internet sector, though, finished off 36 1/3. The 30-year Treasury fell, boosting its yield back up over 6%. The NYSE Composite dropped 3 1/4 on thin volume of 684 million shares. Internet stocks suffered extensive damage. America Online lost 3 and change. Amazon.com was down 7, and CMGI dropping 6. Online brokerages also tanked. Ameritrade down after Lehman Brothers sliced its earnings forecast on the stock. E-Trade, DLJ Direct, and Charles Schwab all closed lower. Bell Atlantic, which just announced plans to offer long-distance phone service in New York, closed lower. On the bright side, Seagram gaining 3.5 after reporting a smaller loss than analysts expected. And shares of broadband wireless company Netro ballooned 15.5, or 194% on its first day of trading, after the company sold 5 million shares at $8 each. For more on Wall Street's reaction to the mounting trade deficit and the weakening dollar, here's correspondent Steve Dunlop of Reuters Financial Television in New York.
News of a skyrocketing trade deficit rekindled fears of higher interest rates here on Wall Street, knocking the Dow off 27 points, while the Nasdaq took a stiffer blow, falling nearly 1.5%. The markets sagged on news that the nation's trade deficit shot up 16% in June to a record $24.6 billion as imports soared above $100 billion for the first time. Economists had been expecting the trade imbalance to shrink slightly from a previous record set in May. The report extended the U.S. dollar's slide against the Japanese yen, the greenback falling to a new 7-month low against the Japanese currency. A weak dollar raises the prices of imported goods. Analysts say that could spur the Federal Reserve to hike interest rates to head off inflation. Bearing the brunt of the market's sour mood Thursday were cyclical and financial stocks. Caterpillar slumped 11/16 on the Dow, with United Technologies off 5/8 and Citigroup falling 1 5/16. Internet stocks also took it on the chin. The group is sensitive to interest rate fears since they depend heavily on borrowed capital. eBay slid 12 3/16, with Yahoo falling back 5 7/8, and E-Trade down 2 5/8. And the world's top supplier of aluminum, Alcoa, lost ground despite wrapping up a deal to buy its rival Reynolds Metals. The maker of Reynolds Wrap accepted Alcoa's $4.4 billion stock offer after rejecting an earlier bid as too low. Acquiring Reynolds helps Alcoa hold on to its #1 ranking after last week's three-way merger linking Canada's Alcan and 2 European competitors. Alcoa shares were off 1 11/16 on the news, with Reynolds losing 2 11/16 after soaring in recent days on expectations of a deal. And checking the final numbers here on Wall Street, the Dow backed away from 11,000 to end at 10,963. A 9-point loss for the S&P 500, with the NASDAQ slumping 36 and the Amex Composite gaining 1.15. And that's the Reuters Market Report. From the American Stock Exchange, I'm Steve Dunlop.
And you heard Steve talk about it, and even though Alcoa won the battle to acquire Reynolds Metals, the war may be far from over. CNN-FN is reporting this morning that McCook Metals, a subsidiary of the Chicago-based investment firm Michigan Avenue Partners, proposes to top Alcoa's bid with its own all-cash offer. Under terms of the Alcoa-Reynolds deal, Reynolds has 30 days to break its agreement with Alcoa if it opts to seek or be sought by another partner. Checking now on the nation's weather, relief comes to the East Coast in the form of rain showers. With a complete look at today's forecast, here's All News Channel's David Johnston.
Clouds building in the east is bringing much-needed moisture up and down the East Coast. Baltimore, New York, the nation's capital, all can expect to see some showers throughout the day today. Showers and isolated thunderstorms also forecast in the Carolinas, all the way down into the deep south. Elsewhere, dry over the midsection of the country, with those monsoonal rain showers expected to return to the desert southwest. The highs warm again in the deep south, 100s in Texas. The contrast, 70s, even some 60s expected in the New England area, with 80s through the plains. David Johnston, First Business.
Coming up on First Business, Microsoft admits a mistake that could lead to your embarrassment. More on the instant message bug is coming up. As if the suffering they've endured so far isn't enough, thousands of people spent the night outside in Turkey following Tuesday's devastating earthquake. They're worried about aftershocks. More than 200 rocked the area in just a 2-hour period on Thursday. Meantime, the death toll continues to mount, now numbering more than 7,000, and Turkey's prime minister warns it will climb dramatically. He says rescue workers won't be able to reach all of those still trapped under rubble before they die of thirst and exposure. And the UN estimates there could be 35,000 people still buried under all the debris. Nearly 100 U.S. experts are on the scene, and they are bolstered by more than 3,000 members of the U.S. military joining in the rescue efforts. In addition to the tremendous loss of life from the earthquake in Turkey, from an economic standpoint, the quake couldn't have come at a worse time. Business correspondent Ron DePaulis explains.
As the death toll continues to mount from the devastating earthquake, the Turkish government is struggling with how to deal with the tragic loss of life and rebuild the devastated areas for the survivors. The quake, the worst on record to hit Turkey's populous areas around Istanbul Tuesday, has left thousands homeless from the towers of rubble that had once been apartment buildings. The damage to residential buildings and commercial properties has been estimated at more than $25 billion, and that's expected to climb. The International Monetary Fund has pledged its support to help Turkey deal with the impact of the earthquake that struck at the country's industrial heartland. Analysts say numerous other international financial institutions will have to join forces to help Turkey with the recovery and rebuilding process.
What the world community can do is pull together from several funds to give emergency aid to Turkey. The World Bank is making a contribution, and individual nations can make a contribution. The European states will probably make a sizable contribution. The U.S. will make a contribution. I would think Russia would as well.
Before the quake struck, the Turkish government had been struggling to deal with that country's estimated $20 billion deficit and an annual inflation rate of 50%. To make matters worse, the heaviest damage from the quake is centered in an area that accounts for more than a third of the country's economy. Roads in the regions are blocked by downed power lines and telephone lines, and factories have been shut down so that workers can look for survivors and help relatives affected by the devastation. About the only good news thus far has been that rescue workers have found some survivors alive in the debris, and an earthquake-sparked fire at Turkey's largest refinery was finally brought under control, ending a threat to a key supply of fuel for the country. In New York, I'm Ron DePaulis reporting.
Among this morning's other top news headline stories, Republican George W. Bush said the most he's said yet about the drug question. With details on that and more, here's All News Channel's Kim Pletica. Hi, Kim.
Hi. Presidential hopeful George W. Bush is once again dealing with the drug question. This time he says he hasn't done illegal drugs in 25 years. Bush told reporters yesterday he made some mistakes in his 20s and that he learned from them. But he says that is all he intends to say, and people who don't like it can vote for somebody else. Bush is 53 years old, which means he would have been 28 the last time any alleged drug use occurred. There is yet another Y2K warning out today, this time from the Navy. A new naval report says there will probably be electrical and water failures in 60 cities that have Naval or Marine Corps facilities. Some of those cities include Dallas, Houston, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale. The report is in sharp contrast to a recent Clinton administration report which said national electrical failures are highly unlikely. And speaking of computers, the Clinton administration wants to be able to search